Chapter 17 through 19, Catcher in the Rye Questions, by Cole Nelson, Jordan Kent, Ryan Chrissy, and Tristan Nipple.
So I'm answering the question about what is so fake about people in the lobby and George from Andover. Our claim is that they're super egotistical and attention seekers. Our quote from the book is on page 141. It says, "You never saw so many phonies in all your life. Everybody smoking their ears off and talking about the place so that everybody could hear and know how sharp they were. He was the kind of phony that you have to give themselves room when they answer everybody's questions." Answering question 2. What is Holden trying to explain to Sally when they're sitting down at the skating rink? "Hey, Sally," I said. What she said, she was looking at some girl on the other side of the room. "Did you ever get fed up?" I said. Did you ever get scared that everything was going to go lousy and unless you did something? Do you like school and all that stuff? Well, I hate it. Boy, do I hate it. But it isn't just that. It's everything. I hate living in New York and all. Taxi cabs and Madison Avenue, buses with all the drivers yelling at you to get on to the rear door. And being introduced to phony guys that call the Lunts angels and going up and down in elevators when you just want to go outside. And guys fitting your pants all the time at Brooks.
Question 3 of chapters 17 through 19 asks us, how do Holden's feelings about Sally change throughout the date? Holden goes from loving her to hating her. Holden loves her only when he is looking at her, but when she starts talking, he hates her. One example of him loving her is when they are in the cab. They start horsing around in the back seat, and then Holden tells us this, quote, "Then, just to show you how crazy I am, when we were coming out of this big clinch, I told her I loved her and all," end quote. The only reason he says he loves her is because he is physically attracted to her. An example of Holden hating Sally is right after Sally finishes talking to Andover. Holden tells us this, quote, "I sort of hated old Sally by the time we got in the cab, after listening to that phony Andover bastard for about 10 hours, end quote. Holden was listening to Sally flirt with Andover even though they were supposed to be on a date. Listening to this made him hate her, but that quickly changes after they go ice skating. Question 4 asks us, why do his feelings for Sally change like this? They change like this because Holden only likes her physical features. When she talks, he can't stand her. When Holden first saw Sally at the start of the date, he says, quote, "The funny part is, I felt like marrying her the minute I saw her," end quote. At the end of the date, though, Holden says to Sally, quote, "Come on, let's get out of here. You give me a royal pain in the ass if you want to know the truth," quote. He says this after they were talking and she said no to running away. These two examples show exactly why his feelings changed the way they did.
Question 5. Why doesn't Holden like the Christmas show at Radio City Music Hall? Holden does not like the Christmas show because he believes the entire production is phony, including the audience watching it. He believes the audience gets amused far too easily. An example of this is on page 155 when he says, "There's a lady sitting next to me that cried all through the goddamn picture. The funnier it got, the more she cried." Holden is not sure why the audience is so into the production, and he tells himself that he just might not be in the mood. The lone bright side Holden finds in the show is the guy who plays the kettle drums because he's the only person who seems to not be egotistical like the other actors. Overall, he sums up his experience on page 154 when he says, "All I can say is, don't see it if you don't want to puke all over yourself." 6. How did DB feel about the Army and the war? DB hated both. Holden recalls a time when DB would return home and all he did was lie on his bed. On page 155, Holden thinks of a time when DB told Allie that if he'd had to shoot anybody, he wouldn't have known which direction to shoot in. He said the Army was practically as full of bastards as the Nazis were.
Question 7. How does Salinger portray the way boys learned about sex back then? Throughout the first part of the book, Salinger portrays that Holden is a quote-unquote sex maniac. But he is completely inexperienced. Throughout the book, Holden shows great interest in women that he doesn't truly love, such as Bernice Krebs and Sally Hayes. They're interested in other boys and men who really are just not that good. At least that's how Holden sees it. But he does see Jane Gallagher as a perfect woman. But he never works up the courage to call her. So maybe deep down he doesn't think that she is that great. Question 8. Is Holden really being childish when he's talking to Carl Luce? It could go both ways here, because while they're talking at the club, you could argue he is being childish because Carl is repeatedly telling Holden to stop asking him about his sex life. But you could also say he's not because Holden is just interested in asking questions. "How's your sex life?" I asked him. He hated you to ask stuff like that. "Relax," he said. "Just sit back and relax for Christ's sake." This shows us that Carl at least views Holden as being childish.